Well, you all can hear Becky saying that's good. That's the first time she's ever told me I look good on video. I'm sure she'll correct that very soon. I'm going to have to get positioned better. Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to have to get positioned better so I can see your comments. I love seeing those. There we go. Try to get this overhead light out of your view. Sorry about these technical difficulties. Last week, Facebook Live didn't want to load the video when I was finished. And tonight, it just totally interrupted me. Well, I was just saying Community Cafe will begin August 17th. We're hopefully going to be eating inside. And hopefully we're going to have lots of community folks join us for that. So it's all free. Invite your neighbors. Chicken cordon bleu that first Wednesday night, August 17th. Why don't we get into our lesson tonight? Last week we did part 1 of chapter 26 of Matthew. Tonight we are doing the second part. It's the longest chapter in the book of Matthew and in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I want to take our time. What were some of the events that happened in the first part of Matthew 26? If you were on last week in particular, or if you just read that today, tell me something that happened in the first half of Matthew 26. We got through the first 30 verses. So tell me something that happened in all of that. Jesus did something very special at the conclusion of their meal. I'll drop you a hint for you. But there were a number of things that happened. Judas did some things. A woman with some perfume did something. It's at the opening of chapter 26. It's the night before the Last Supper. And Jesus was eating dinner in Bethany. A woman came and anointed him. She had an alabaster jar of perfume, an oil, and she broke it and put that on his head. And Jesus made the comment that she had prepared him for his burial. That perfume, that oil would have been, the odor would have lasted right up until and through his crucifixion. Thank you. Christy got that anointing. You came in right under the wire, Christy. Yes, exactly right, Lynn. The leaders of the Jews are plotting to arrest Jesus. They had kind of resigned themselves that if they can't get him quickly, they probably are going to have to wait until after the Passover, the feast. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests and offered to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. They agreed on that price. The apostles prepared the Passover meal, and Jesus and the 12 ate that meal. At the end of the meal is when Jesus instituted Holy Communion. He took a piece of bread, he took a cup of the wine, and he blessed them and gave us those words that we use in Holy Communion, saying, "Do this in remembrance of me." He, in doing that, instituted the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, Holy Communion, Mass, whatever you would call it. Verse 30 says, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. More than likely, that hymn is one of the Psalms. Jewish people in Jesus' day used the book of Psalms pretty much as a hymn book. And this has been, it was a Passover meal with a very special blessing at the end of their communion. They sang, now they go out. Now, the Kidron Valley runs along the eastern wall of the old city of Jerusalem. And on the other side of that wall, you go down into a ravine, a little valley, and then up the other side is a hillside that's called the Mount of Olives. Olive trees still grow on that hillside today. You can sit on that hillside. Nathan, Becky, Vicky, a bunch of us from Christ Church went to Israel in February of 2020, just before the pandemic hit. And we went to the Mount of Olives. We sat on the Mount of Olives. We went to the Garden of Gethsemane, the traditional site for that. With so many people in the city of Jerusalem for Passover, a lot of people would have been sleeping outside at night. There just weren't there wasn't room in the inn, as we would say, at the birth of Christ. And apparently that was Jesus' plan for himself and his disciples. It appears that they've gone to the Mount of Olives to spend the night. The night before, or at least 2 nights before, they spent the night in Bethany. As he walked along, he spoke to his apostles, and Becky's going to read 5 verses here. If you would, Becky, 31 through 35.
Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same.
Don't forget that. I have a tendency to forget when Peter says, even if I have to die with you, I'd never desert you or disown you. All the apostles said the same. We pick on Peter, bless his heart. He's the first to act, the first to speak up, and here he just can't believe that he would ever disown Jesus. Even as Jesus prophesies that the 11 will desert him, he knows Judas is going to betray him, but the ones who remain, the 11, will desert him. What confidence does Jesus express? In other words, it's not like, well, I've lost it. You're all gonna scatter, you're gonna desert me. But there's a confidence there as well. Lynn says Peter was impulsive. Absolutely. He spoke oftentimes before he thought. He was quick to act. But Jesus expresses a confidence, even as he says, you're all going to fall away. Becky, read, I think it's verse 31.
Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered."
Okay, so they're going to scatter, they're going to leave, but read one more verse.
"But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee."
Okay, he's going to go ahead of them to Galilee. He says ahead of you, which implies he's going to see them in Galilee. And in fact, he will. And yes, Jesus knows what's about to happen. He's telling them, I'm going to go ahead of you to Galilee. It will be at Galilee that Peter is reinstated. And so that kind of gives us a preview of what comes later. We were talking about Peter being impulsive. It's his personality to jump in. Thank you, Nikki. That's exactly right. Then they'll come back together, as she says, whenever they meet up in Galilee. It's his loyalty to Jesus that's speaking here. He just can't imagine a time or a situation where he would disown Jesus. That time is coming. His loyalty will be tested for fear of his own arrest. He's going to be thinking about himself and his own safety whenever he denies Jesus. It's not one of those things that he just decides, like Judas does, that he'll do it. Becky's going to read, now if you would please, 36 to 46, and tell me who it is that goes further with Jesus. They've come now to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." Then, when he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer."
Okay, a couple of you have answered. It was Peter and the sons of Zebedee, James and John. They were his inner circle. It's kind of like he's got 12 apostles. He's got maybe 120, 30 disciples. We don't know how many. I think there's 120 mentioned in the book of Acts who were with him later. Out of those 12 apostles, out of those 3 that are kind of the inner circle, it was these same 3 who went with Jesus to the transfiguration up on the mountain. What's the struggle that Jesus is agonizing over here? What's his struggle? It's important for us to recognize this. This last night of his time on earth, he's praying, and one of the Gospels says he prayed and perspired like drops of blood. This is agony when you pray that way, when you suffer and stress in that way. What is his struggle? Okay, Greg says accepting his Father's will. Exactly right. It's hard to get our heads around it, but Jesus is fully human and fully divine. He is God's Son. Greg refers to the Father as Jesus' Father. He knows, yes, Christy, he's got this separation coming. He's asking, "Take this cup from me." Yes, his human side is saying, his human side is saying, "I'm 30 years old, 33, whatever his age. I don't want to die yet. I've got more work to do. I've got these friends. I definitely don't want to die on the cross. That's a horrible, horrible way to die." There's the physical agony of it, and there's the separation from the Father that Christy mentions. He's going to take on our sin, and it's the first time in his life that he has felt separated from his Father. He's known that this is coming. He's told his apostles this 3 different times. There's a lot of 3s in the Gospel of Matthew. 3 different times he's told the apostles he has to suffer. It's coming. But he is absolutely committed to doing his Father's will. He really wanted God to spare him, remove this cup from me, and then, but not my will, but yours. He had to know that it was really God's will that he die. And for me, that's one of the hardest things in living as a Christian, is knowing what is God's will. I know I'm guilty oftentimes of praying for something and then asking God to bless it. It's like, this is what I think should happen. Now, would you bless it? And it's harder to back up and say, "Tell me what we should do. What is your will?" Once Jesus realizes that, then he accepts it. These guys physically are tired. Jesus is very forgiving. He goes and says to them, he chides them, what, can you not stay awake and pray? Think about it, of all the times he's needed their attention, their prayers, their wakefulness. They're asleep. But he says, the spirit is willing, the body is weak. Their sleep reminds me of human apathy. You know, we spiritually sleep through a lot of things that we should be upset about. The apostles are doing that night. 3 times he comes and finds them asleep. And then he wakes them up because he wants them to see and participate in the arrest. He sees Judas coming at the head of the armed crowd coming to arrest him. So now he woke them up for this coming scene. Becky, if you would, read 47 through 51.
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Greetings, Rabbi, and he kissed him. Jesus replied, Friend, do what you came for. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear.
How does Judas greet Jesus? Well, and let's flip it around. How does Jesus greet Judas? Judas comes up and kisses him. By the way, you may think that looks
he says,
weird.
Rabbi.
Oh, Becky says he says Rabbi. He calls him Rabbi, teacher, the one that I follow.
And Jesus says friend.
And Jesus calls him friend. It's as if Jesus is giving Judas every last chance to say, I can't do this. This is my rabbi. This is the one I love. This is one I'll be loyal to. But Judas has made up his mind. We don't know why he betrayed him. There have been different theories. We talked about that last week. But Judas is on that. He's on that slippery slope. He's brought the crowd. They're armed, and even as Jesus calls him friend, he still loves Judas. Yes, Greg says, do what you came to do. Now, somebody pulls a sword and strikes one of the servants who had come to arrest Jesus. Who do you suppose did that? Out of the 11 apostles left after Judas has betrayed him, who would you guess whips out a sword and struck someone? And by the way, his name isn't, Christy says Peter, of course. And Nikki, it just so fits his character, doesn't it? His personality, that impulsiveness. Where a whole bunch of people are jumping on this. It was Peter for sure. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written during Peter's lifetime, and neither of them identify who he was. One of the apostles said it was the left ear. Another of the Gospels say that Jesus healed the person, put the ear back on. It's only in the Gospel of John, written probably in AD 90 or even maybe a little after that, and Peter was gone. And John tells that it was Peter. Jane Ford says Peter, and she put it in all caps. She's emphasizing it, yes. Jesus responds to Peter's act of kindness by stopping it. He says, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. if I wanted to, and then it's interesting, it says, if I wanted to call 12 legions A legion is 1,000 soldiers. If I want to call 12 legions of angels to defend me, I could do that. Dying is Jesus' choice. After that prayer, after he has said, "Not my will, but yours be done," he's going ahead with this at every step. I'm guessing that Judas's heart sank at this point. I'm thinking that Judas may have thought he'd pushed Jesus into being the warrior king that he wanted, and Jesus is peacefully giving himself up. I'm just guessing about that. Then Jesus turns to the crowd. He gave him a little bit of trash talk. Why does he trash talk the crowd? Now, these are people who have come with clubs and swords to arrest him. He's in a ball game when you talk this way. We call it trash talk. What's he saying to these people? What's he chiding them for? Yeah, they sneak out, Christy says, and arrest him in the dark. Jesus said, "I've been in the temple every day teaching. You could have arrested me, but you didn't. Instead, you come out here in the dark where no one can see. You come with weapons like all I've done," thank you, Greg, is preach love and peace. You come with weapons like I'm a terrorist or someone who's violent. And you've sneaked out here in secret. He never hid from him. He says, "Thank you. Y'all are giving excellent answers." All the disciples, according to Matthew, deserted him. They ran away. Their faith crumbles sometimes in the face of danger. Not just theirs, but all of us. It's one thing, it's one thing to stand and profess our faith, to be strong in church, but then on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever tough times hit, it's easy to slip away. And so we shouldn't cluck our tongue at the apostles and say, "Look, they scattered him. They all deserted him. They're human." Now we come to a hearing. I almost called it a trial. It's more like a hearing. And Becky's going to read that for us, please, 57 to 60.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Did you say through 60?
Through 60.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Lynn makes a good point. If she thought she might be crucified along with him, she would run away as well. Of course, it's human nature. This hearing is somewhat like a grand jury hearing. They can't really try him of a capital offense. One of the Gospels says the Sanhedrin got back together the next morning, but the people who have to really try him and the only ones who can convict him of something deserving capital punishment is the Romans. This is more like today in our system. It's a little bit like a grand jury hearing. You bring charges and see if the grand jury says, yeah, that we should try this person for that. They're almost a step before that. They're trying to find what charges can we take to the Romans. The next morning, they decide what charge they'll use and take him to the Romans. Now, this Sanhedrin was composed of 71 elders. It's the ruling council of Jerusalem. It's called their Supreme Council. They have legislative, executive, and judicial authority. So this is a really important group. They break a number of their rules, which was really, really unusual. The Sanhedrin was a very orderly group, but some of their rules, they were not to meet anywhere except in the hall of court. They're at Caiaphas' house. They've assembled there to hear and try to come up with the charges. They were never, ever supposed to meet at night. It's kind of like our sunshine laws. Meetings aren't to be conducted in secret, but out in public. Their rule was to never meet at night. They could never execute someone on the day they found them guilty. The next morning, they're going to find him guilty of blasphemy. And their rule was you always wait a day. You sleep on it to make sure you haven't been too hasty. They're going to break that rule as well. But they follow their rule to call in multiple witnesses. Whenever they call in people, they have a problem. What problem do they have with their rule that says before we can say that something is true, two witnesses have to basically say the same thing? What problem do they have with that? Anybody pick up on that in what Becky read?
False witnesses?
They brought a lot of false witnesses, yes, and they're saying things that weren't true. They also have trouble getting any two witnesses to say the same thing. They're all just, well, this one that, this one that, this one something else. And they need, anything but false witnesses. No witnesses to tell them anything that he's done that's worthy of execution. Finally, two people come in and say, remember when Jesus was at the temple and his apostles said, wow, look at this. Look how large these stones are. And Jesus says, he kind of sits down and says, let's talk about this. You can tear down this temple, talking about himself, and in 3 days it will be raised again. He's talking about himself. Well, two witnesses came in and says, he said he could destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, those people likely aren't intentionally lying. They've misunderstood what he was saying. They didn't understand that he was talking about his own body being restored after 3 days. But it looks like now, well, maybe tearing down the temple is something they can hang their hat on. They're not finished. Becky, if you would, read 62 through 68.
Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered.
Okay, so under Jewish law, claiming to be God was blasphemy, and it was punishable by stoning. Now, they're going to realize, okay, the Romans could care less about blasphemy, so they're going to trump up charges that have to do with insurrection and take those to Pilate. But for now, the Sanhedrin has found something they can kind of hang their hat on. The high priest broke one of the primary rules of the way the Sanhedrin conducted business. In our legal system, you cannot be required to testify against yourself. If you're asked a question that will lead to your being convicted, you can take the Fifth Amendment. Our Fifth Amendment says we don't have to testify and point to our own guilt. The Sanhedrin had a similar rule that says you should not ask a question that was cause the accused to testify against himself. And that's exactly what the high priest did. Caiaphas said, well, tell us, are you the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God? And what was the answer? This is so important here. Some people want to say, that Jesus was a prophet, he was a teacher, but he wasn't the Messiah. He was not the Christ. He was not the Son of God. That's not Jesus' answer. Are you the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God? You said it. Jesus says, yes, it is as you said, as you say. We're forced here to have one of three opinions. I'm going to give you a choice of A, B, or C. A, Jesus lied to the Sanhedrin. If he lied to the Sanhedrin, option A, he died for a lie. His admitting that he is the Son of God openly in front of the Sanhedrin. Think how many times Jesus said, shh, don't tell anybody I'm the Christ. Shh, don't tell anybody who healed you. Now, he rode into town on Palm Sunday a week ago, declaring himself the king. Now he has said, yes, you said it, I'm the Christ. Jesus of Nazareth would not have died for a lie. Option A is not a good one. Option B, Jesus of Nazareth had a Messiah complex and mistakenly thought he was the Christ. He definitely thinks he's the Christ. I'm not going to choose that one. I don't think he had a Messiah complex. I'm going to choose option C, which says Jesus of Nazareth indeed was the Christ, the Son of God. And that option D that sometimes Muslims and others put, that other Muslims and other people of other faiths used to describe Jesus as a man, a good person, a prophet, a teacher. Jesus takes that away. No. Yes, I'm a teacher. Yes, I'm a prophet, but that's not who I am. I am the Christ. When you travel to the Holy Land, guides will often take you to places that may have been certain locations because they're not sure. Down through time, some of the places have become kind of murky. We're not positive. The first time I went to Israel, Christy and I went together with her family and people from her church. We were taken to the home of Caiaphas. And the guide said, we think this is the home of Caiaphas. It was excavated. It was cut from stone. The basement was cut from stone. The house was built on top of it. And clearly it was a place where prisoners could be held. Little tiny windows. I've never forgotten that. Whether that was the place where Jesus spent the night or not, it was a graphic reminder of a place where prisoners would be kept, where they would be flogged, and where they would be held without sleep. Meanwhile, what's happened to the apostles? Here we are. We're at Caiaphas' house. The Sanhedrin has met. And now where are the apostles? They scattered and ran. Judas is waiting to see what happens. But what about Peter? The one that takes on so much heat because of his denial. And I'm not excusing Peter. Denying Christ was bad. But yes, Lynn, they were lying low. All of them except Peter. Peter was bold enough. One of the Gospels, I think it's John, says another apostle went along with Peter, and that would have probably been John. Matthew only tells us about Peter. He went right into the courtyard. He followed along and went right to Caiaphas' house. Doing that was impulsive. Doing that was rash. Doing that was bold. Doing that was an awesome witness. Except whenever he is found out. Yeah, Peter's now in the courtyard. Thank you, Lynn. Whenever people around the courtyard begin to hear Peter talk, look at him, see how he's dressed, they start to figure out this guy's a Galilean. Now here we are. We're in down in Judea, or up in Judea, Jerusalem. And here's this guy who talks like a Galilean. And so they ask, were you with him? No. Are you one of his disciples? No. One of the apostles says he calls down curses. One of the Gospels say he calls down curses as he denies even knowing Christ. The third time that happens, exactly as Jesus said, and then the rooster crows, and it says he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, that's impulsive Peter realizes I've goofed up. I had the opportunity to stand up for my rabbi, my Savior, my Messiah, Christ, and I passed it up. I wasn't up to the test. And he says he wept bitterly. Now I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. We'll do Matthew 27 next week. But at the very beginning of Matthew 27, it tells us that when Judas saw Jesus brought out, tied up, sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin, and handed over to Pilate, what did Judas do? You remember what Judas does? He does two things. One of those things has to do with the 30 pieces of silver. What did he do with the silver, and what did he do with himself? I want to focus on the difference between what Judas did and what Peter did. Betraying Jesus was a horrible thing to do. It facilitated his arrest.
He threw the coins in the temple.
Becky just answered and says he threw the coins back into the temple. We don't know what Judas's motive was. John says he was crooked, that he was always stealing from the treasury of the apostles. If that was the case, he's so sorry. Yes, Nick, he threw the silver back in and he went out and hanged himself. Thank you. A bunch of people are jumping in on that. He gave back the money. He went and hanged himself. Peter, we're going to read later on how Peter, somebody mentioned earlier that Jesus said, hey, go, I'll see you in Galilee. We'll be reunited. He was. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to do this to contrast. Peter's denial was bad. Judas's betrayal was very bad. I don't know which sin is worse than the other, but the way they responded to their sins are so different. Judas hanged himself. Peter was reinstated. Peter, do you love me? See, he's so sorry for that. I'm guessing he was having trouble looking Jesus in the eye, although in the Gospel of John it tells us that when he saw him in Galilee, he jumped out of the boat, his clothes were rolled up, and he ran to Jesus. And Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Feed my lambs. He's giving Peter an assignment. Peter has totally been reinstated. Could Judas have been reinstated? Absolutely. There's no sin that we can do other than blaspheming the Holy Spirit. In other words, not having a spirit seeking forgiveness. But no matter how badly we sin, no matter how badly, if we repent, if we're sorry, if we confess and ask Jesus for forgiveness, he grants it. Peter was granted forgiveness. Judas ends tragically. His life is over. We can count on the grace that Jesus hands out as he forgives our sin. Well, folks, we have finished chapter 26. 27 is not quite so long, and we'll do that next week. Then the following week we'll do Matthew 28 and wrap this study up. It's been good having so many people on tonight, and I'm glad I finally got my phone working right. It's Facebook is kind of strange these days. Sometimes you get one look and sometimes another, but we made it work. Well, everybody have a good night tonight, and I hope to see you on next Thursday night. Take care.